go.
Hello and welcome back to Writer Mother Monster. I'm your host, Laura Ehrlich, and this is the first episode in the new year, 2022. So for those of you who are new to Writer Mother Monster, welcome. This is both a live show almost every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern and an audio podcast that you can find anywhere that you download podcasts. So if you would love to join us in person or live, you can join us on Thursdays at 6 p.m. and chat with us in the chat function. I will weave your questions and comments into the conversation. As you've noticed, I'm a little rusty coming back from vacation, but bear with me. Tonight's guest is Alena Dillon. And if you enjoy this episode, as always, please become a patron or patroness to help keep the podcast going so we can have more fabulous authors like Alena join us on the podcast. I'm excited to introduce Alena. Alena Dillon is the author of Mercy House, a Library Journal Best Book of 2020, which has been optioned as a television series produced by Amy Schumer. The Happiest Girl in the World, a Good Morning America pick. My Body is a Big Fat Temple, a memoir of pregnancy and early parenting, and Eyes Turned Skyward, a novel forthcoming in fall 2022. Her work has appeared in publications including The Daily Beast, LitHub, River Teeth, Slice Magazine, The Rumpus, and Bustle. She teaches creative writing and lives on the North Shore of Boston, where she has a 3-year-old son and a baby due in July. She describes writer motherhood in 3 words as fierce, tender, marathon. Now, please join me in welcoming Alena Dillon. Hi, Alena.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. And as you can see, it's been about a month since I've done this, so have patience with me.
I've only listened to the podcast, so I never saw the animation at the beginning along with the music. It was really impressive. It was very exciting.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, so listeners who haven't watched the live show or the archived videos, you heard it here.
Yeah, revisit.
But Alena, I'm so happy to have you with us. And let's start by talking about those 3 words you used to describe writer motherhood. Those were fierce, tender, and marathon. Tell us about those words.
Yeah. So I was just thinking of words that apply to both subjects. And there's actually like a lot of overlap between writing and motherhood, a lot of labor of love. But especially lately with like the phases of my 3-year-old, I've found that like there's moments of just such sweet tenderness and then such kind of like exhaustion and like so many challenges. So like you're kind of going from one end of the spectrum to the other where you have to be, which requires a lot of endurance, like as in a marathon. And also ferocity and tenderness. So it's just like the whole breadth of experiences. And the same with writing, right? You have to be tender with your work and with yourself and patient. You have to be fierce about, tackling all of the obstacles that come your way. And it's a long process. So it's not a sprint. It's something that you have to build stamina for. So yeah, that's where those words came from.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually plays into your memoir, My Body is a Big Fat Temple. Tell us a little bit about that book as it relates to endurance and ferocity.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I wrote the book because when I was considering motherhood, I tried to gather as many narratives as I could to prepare myself. So to see what I might expect. It's called expecting. So, but then I found that like they actually, there is kind of like a dearth of books on the subject. Like there were a lot of kind of science how-tos, but not a lot about like the emotional journey. So I tried to prepare myself as much as I could, and I read and and really appreciated all of the literature that's out there. But as I encountered each experience and each challenge, I found that like there is a lot of airbrushing that goes on when talking about the pregnancy and early motherhood experience. There's a lot of idealizing and making it like talking, just only telling one part of the story. And a lot of that stuff is true. And I experienced those things as well, a lot of the romanticism. But all like kind of the grisly bits are censored, and it leaves women unprepared. So when they come across those instances, they feel blindsided. And they also could feel like aberrations, you know, like that this maybe doesn't happen to everybody, that this is just something that I'm going through and struggling with. So I think that there needs to be a lot more transparency in the conversation about like the whole spectrum of experiences that continues as motherhood persists. And perhaps like if there is that communication, then you'd be kind of more prepared for the marathon that is pregnancy, because it is a long time. I mean, like, because I'm currently pregnant, so it's all coming back to me. Not that I don't think I ever forgot it, but like at 24 weeks, I'm like, to get to 40 weeks, like it feels like every day is just so long when you're uncomfortable and when like you're struggling with something. It feels like a chronic condition, and it like it did last time, and this time like renews my respect for people who deal with chronic conditions every day and have to carry that around with them and get through the day. It's exhausting.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. What surprise? So I'm sure a lot of things, but can you give us an example of one of those grisly bits that surprised you about pregnancy?
Yeah, I can give you a litany. So like the first one, and the one that I'm struggling most with this time, is like the quote unquote morning sickness. Like when that is captured in media and told and like incorporated into story, it's like, it's just minimized. I mean, like you have like women vomiting during the day, you like, and they call it morning sickness. So there's the implication that it only happens in the morning, but like you don't actually hear a lot about like the debilitating nature that is possible. Like that I just felt like there was a veil cast over my life for so long, and it just like it hinders your capacity to experience joy. Like when you're just feeling sick, it's like having the flu for 40 weeks if you're sick the entire time, which is my case this time. Last time it stopped at 20 weeks, but that's still like 4 or 5 months of being sick every day. And like that's really like when you're trying to feel joyful about something and to be excited about something, and people are saying congratulations and expecting you to be excited about something, it's even more of a challenge then. And then this time having a toddler has been an extra obstacle, because like I don't just feel like I'm missing out on certain aspects of my life because I'm feeling sick, but that I'm missing out on certain aspects of his life, which is like a loss, you know? So like pregnancy is this huge gift. Like a lot of people struggle to do it, and like I'm creating this life, and this life is going to enrich me in a lot of ways, and I know that, and I'm grateful. But there's also like some mourning to it. Like there's some grief that like you can't live the way that you did before.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry you're dealing with that. It's painful.
Thank you. Yeah, but it's like so common. Like it happens to so many women, and I feel like we don't hear all those stories, and like we don't commiserate, and like for that reason then there's not as much support as maybe should be available. So lately, and it's like, and I live in the state of Massachusetts, and they have this great new family leave program, so like there's a lot more support coming for new parents, and I really appreciate that. But like I'm not sure that there is as much support and understanding for pregnant women, because like, and some people have perfectly healthy pregnancies and don't need or want extra resources. But I feel like when you can't use the morning sickness excuse because it's not taken seriously, it's like kind of treated like, well, everyone else deals with it fine, so what makes you any different? But like if we were more open about how hard it is, then there might be kind of more reverence and respect for women who are really struggling.
Absolutely. Now, how did that play into writing your book?
Yeah, so I made sure to write everything in the moment, because I was afraid that I've heard all these stories that are like you forget. And that hasn't been the case for me so far. I think I remember pretty much everything so far. But in case that was the truth, I didn't want time to kind of airbrush and soften the experiences, because I was hoping to capture, what it feels like in the moment, so that women who are in that moment can recognize themselves in my pages as well. So I would really try to write through those hard times. Like, so through the morning sickness, that was one surprise. Probably the next most difficult aspect was like the labor. So I didn't write during labor, but I did write, I did write a week after labor when everything was still fresh. I made sure to get it all down so I didn't forget anything. And like, what a blur that is. So I'm really glad that I wrote that down, because I certainly wouldn't have remembered every detail now. And then in those early postpartum days, when like, again, like people kind of minimize, what the baby blues feels like. I mean, it's such like a cutesy euphemism, like, oh, the baby blues. That's like a serious depression or can be a serious depression. And like we make it sound like, oh, it's just, the cutesy little baby blues. Or like breastfeeding can be such a struggle. So like all of those things I made sure to write in the moment so that nothing, would be forgotten.
Oh, tell me more about writing in the moment, like the actual logistics of writing in the moment, because I remember, as much as I can, my daughter's 5 now, trying to capture pregnancy and birth, and I just couldn't. For some reason, I had these grand plans of like journaling all of this experience, and I couldn't do it, or something stopped me from doing that. And I remember that maybe, like you said, like a week after giving birth, I wrote down the birth experience, because I was like, well, I'll never do that again. So I should write it down. But even that was really hard, because it was something I wrote, I think, during like my daughter's nap. And it was a choice between writing about her birth or taking a shower or like eating my lunch. So tell me about the logistics of actually physically writing during pregnancy, right after birth, and during postpartum period.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I went to the page to like rediscover myself, or like keep a kind of a finger on the person that I was before, because when you're in like the chaos of having a newborn, it's like, it's such a whirlwind and you can't control anything, and everything feels kind of like delusional, and it's so like, it was nice to have this anchor where I could open my laptop and try to revisit the person I was, even if it was only for 10 minutes or something. So I would just kind of write in these little bursts. Also, my parents happened to came for a month, so I think that probably helped. They were just like so obsessed with my son. So I had like no, if I wanted to go write, like there was no problem with that. But I think like maybe in some ways I disappeared then, because like I wasn't sure who I was as a mother yet. And it was kind of comforting to then like try to find who I was as a writer, and just like to try to locate myself on a map somewhere. So perhaps like it wasn't healthy for me to be writing at that time. I don't know. But like I always use writing to try to process what I'm feeling. And I had kind of a late attachment to my son. It took a few months before like that bond was really formed. And that terrified me, because I had never really heard about mothers not feeling like they were instantly in love with their kid. Although since I've published this book, a lot of women have gotten in touch with me and told me that it was the same experience for them. So I think like part of my, like, I mean, I had a little bit of postpartum depression probably as well. And like part of my kind of, self therapy was going to the page and like putting those thoughts down as honestly as I could, and trying to see like why I felt that way and why it scared me and why it's important. So yeah, that was part of the process. But I will say this, even though I wrote everything in real time, a lot of the revisions happened later, and I would revisit some of these pages and be like, oh my gosh, that's the worst writing I've ever read. Like I could definitely see that I was sleep deprived and not producing good work. But it was like, more of a logging of the facts, so that when I could revise it and like then turn it into kind of more beautiful prose later, at least the emotions were preserved.
No, that makes perfect sense. I feel that way right now. I'm returning to journals that I'd kept when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, and it's so angsty and so raw and not well written in many places, but it doesn't matter because, like you said, you get the emotion and you can put yourself back there in a way that I don't think you can if you haven't chronicled it in the moment. So I see exactly what you mean. And I'm really interested in your sort of writerly approach to pregnancy and motherhood. And I've heard from many other guests that same sort of need to go to the page to make sense of the process and the experience for yourself. And I'm interested that you did that even before becoming pregnant, the sense of looking for, like you said, the narrative in pregnancy, and not finding it. And so creating it for yourself and for others after the fact. Yeah, that's fascinating. So tell me a little bit more about that early stage before you got pregnant. What were you looking for? And I hear you saying that you returned to your writing as a way to anchor yourself and to keep a touch on who you are. So was there something about identity and the need to retain your selfhood in that early search for narratives in pregnancy?
So I think the reason that I started writing about pregnancy, or like what even like struck me, was because I had been waiting and waiting for this urge that people talk about, this like biological imperative that like you'll one day have, your maternal clock start ticking and you'll want kids. And so I had been waiting for that for a long time. And then, I'm married 7 years and it's like still not happening. And unfortunately, like women have to like at some point, make a choice. Like there is a deadline on our bodies. Like I'm 35 right now and considered a geriatric pregnancy, which is such an unfair use of language. So when I was like, okay, I'm heading towards my mid 30s, I have to make a decision, especially if I, want to consider having multiple children. And I was concerned that like I didn't have that impulse. That's when I started writing first about the topic, is like, what are my fears? How am I different than other people? And I, was looking, I searched, there's a book called Maybe Baby, which is a really interesting collection of, perspectives of women who are deciding whether or not to become mothers. So there's like a section for people who are thinking about it, and then a section for people that decided to, and a section for people that decided not to. So that was like kind of a really like a way for me to go through and kind of compare, contrast, and like find my commonalities and my differences and stuff. And I just wanted to kind of contribute to that discussion about like, what does it mean for a woman if she doesn't want to become a mother? Like how do you make that choice? Is it an obvious choice? Is it kind of a calculated risk? And like, why do you feel shame if maybe it's not there? Like, what is the cultural context for that? So that was kind of like the first essay that I started. And then as I kind of confronted each obstacle, each like milestone along the way of the pregnancy, that got another essay. And again, it was just like kind of, placing me in like the canon of motherhood literature, which is so limited, but like trying to like compare myself to, other people's experiences and what makes my experience different and why it matters to me and like why it might matter to other people as well.
Yeah, no, a lot of what you're saying resonates with me too. I was married for I think also 7 years, maybe 6 or 7 years, and it was waiting for that biological impulse to have children. And I didn't think I ever wanted children, but then after, similar to you, I was like, I'm approaching my mid 30s, and if we're gonna make this decision, it's now or never. And I also went looking for those narratives, and the only ones I could find at the time, this was 7 years ago or so, where a book had just come out, and I've said this before on this podcast. It was a collection of women writers talking about why they chose not to have children. I was like, that is so unhelpful. It's like, I know all the reasons not to have children. Like that's,
but a lot of people think that it's like so obvious, like why, you must have child. Like a lot of women are just considered like future mothers. Like you're gonna regret it. Like that's kind of like built into the conversation. So that's it seems obvious because as a mother, there's a lot of drawbacks to having kids. Like I can tell you a lot of reasons why you shouldn't have kids. But I think for some people, like they just feel that expectation of what is demanded of their gender.
Yeah. Did you feel that weight or that pressure, or where was the questioning of that biological clock coming from? Was that internal for you, or were you feeling pressure from society?
I think like a lot of people, that it comes from a lot of different places. There aren't a lot of models of women, and in my life there aren't a lot of models of women who decided not to have children. Mm-hmm. So it would be an anomaly. It would be something in need of explanation and defense. But like I wouldn't say that like I decided to have children because of expectation and pressure. Like that was a decision that I made personally, although I think it would have shocked a lot of people and would have required a lot of justification and repeated defense over and over again. Like, yeah, like my parents were waiting for their grandchild, like from the minute I got married. Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of mother is or was your mother when you were growing up?
So my mother was, it's like she's a very, she's a feminist in a lot of ways without but would probably never call herself that. Mm-hmm. Like she's a very strong woman. And I think, probably a lot of my feminist leanings come from her, although she would probably not want to claim them. But yeah, she's somebody who just like did everything herself. Like she was self-sufficient and continues to be to this day. Never hired anybody, took on jobs, like man-sized jobs, quote unquote, and worked tirelessly. She had like a strong work ethic, strong opinions, and she was a stay-at-home mom. But when we went to high school, she returned to work. But she always instilled in me that like she thought that I should always have a job, and that stuck with me because I think maybe when she was a stay-at-home mom, she maybe lost it's hard to just be a stay-at-home mom and like have your whole life dedicated to menial tasks that are underappreciated. Like I could certainly in retrospect see why that was a frustrating line of work. Like it's a really hard thing to be like serving your family, and like most of your family are children who are not going to appreciate that work. And especially when you're capable of like other things, like she's a smart woman and like has licenses and was a dental hygienist. And so she could there were other paths. And I think that maybe when she was, just like cleaning and cooking and kind of doing these things that weren't satisfying necessarily all the time, and she didn't have anything of her own, so I think she told me a number of times, when you have children, make sure that you never stop having something for yourself.
Yeah. I wonder, and it'll be interesting to see our children's generation and how that plays out. But I think you and I are of a similar generation. I'm a few years older than you, but my mother was very similar in that she's a stay-at-home mother, and she had so much ambition and almost had a PhD in Egyptology and like all of these things. And the domestic everyday tasks, as you said, felt very thankless, I think. And I wonder now with our generation, I'm seeing so many more working moms for a lot of reasons. I think back then their daycare wasn't as accessible, which is shocking because it's not terribly accessible now, right? And women going back to work after childbirth was not the norm. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But
I agree, because like so much of growing up to become a parent is then a reaction to your own childhood. Yes, so like in a lot of ways we're reacting to how our mothers were. And so, yeah, it will be interesting to see in what ways our kids react and like decide which of our choices they thought worked and which they'd like to strengthen.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. Do you know if you're willing to share, and please don't feel pressured, do you know if your forthcoming baby is a boy or a girl?
I do. It's a girl.
Okay, yep. So yeah. That was what I was wondering. So you have a son.
Yes.
And now you're going to have a little girl, and raising a daughter has been really interesting for me, just thinking about my own mother and the messages I want to impart to my daughter. Have you been thinking about that much yet, or are you still in the throes just of like trying to get through the pregnancy?
Again, and I haven't really started to think of it a lot, but I've certainly given it a lot of thought to raising my son as well, and like in what ways, you know, certainly like women juggle a lot of discrimination and obstacles, but like there are, you know, ways that we could try to correct kind of patriarchal impulses with sons too. And I think like a lot of what my work deals with is like the ways in which women have to overcome that. But yeah, my son has been kind of this fresh lens of like, how do we impart, like in what ways have men suffered too? Like, because if we're like treating feminine characteristics as lesser, you know, and if a man then feels like they have some of those characteristics, like that could spurn a lot of self-hate as well. So like, in what ways do we need to make an intention to support, you know, some of those tendencies? Like, and I even though I'm a feminist, like sometimes I find myself just being like, influenced by the way that we've been programmed. Like anybody, like, you know, if my son like wants a purple backpack, like the first thing that strikes into my brain is like, but you're, I don't want you to be picked on at school. Like that will be thought of as unusual. And like that will, but like what, like purple's a beautiful color. He loves like these beautiful colors. Why shouldn't he have anything he wants? And like, like my reaction to that is going to shape what he thinks is good and not. And like, what about himself I approve of or disapprove of? So like I have to, like I'm taking like a lot of care to follow his lead rather than, you know, trying and like have him be a reaction to like these established rules. And I think it's the same with women, with daughters, is like, you know, instead of directing them to what we think is appropriate for females, to like let them just be who they are as people and support their inclinations rather than shaping them based on the fundamentals of our society that are built in place.
Yeah, no, that's so eloquently said and so true for boys as well as girls. I don't have that flip side experience, but definitely I've heard from other friends with girls something similar to my experience, where we're sort of trying to how do I want to put this, to not buy in to the sort of pink and princess and like unicorn culture that like Target wants us to buy those things for our daughters, right? And Frozen. But it's everywhere and they're going to see it. And there's something, not all girls, of course, but like many girls are attracted to those things. And my daughter is all about unicorns right now and pink and purple. And I think it's equally as harming to say, no, you can't have those things because they're too girly. And so it's like, where's that balance and how do you strike that balance? And oh, it's so
I know. I totally relate to that too, because I have a friend who has a daughter, and like every birthday and Christmas, I'm like giving her, you know, like baby feminist book and like STEM, you know, like Marie Claire's story and like and like I'm like trying to, not Marie Claire, what her name, that's what stumbled me.
Marie Curie, yeah, pregnancy.
Thank you. The scientists and like that but I said the magazine. So anyway, I'm like trying to steer her towards like these alternate paths, but like that I realized that like, well, you know, follow her interests again. Like it's just like let them lead the way. And so like this Christmas I bought her an Anna doll. So just leaned in.
Totally. No, and I want to shift gears in a second, but I'll share this last thing that I remember. I'm still angry about this because kids do pick it up. They pick up people's responses to their choices. And I remember when my daughter was, I don't remember how old, but she was potty training and she was really excited because she had chosen her own underwear from a store, and they were like boys briefs, boys, quote unquote, from the boys section. And they had superheroes on them. And so we're like, all right, you know, whatever. And she went to school and her teacher at daycare said, oh, those are boy underwears. you shouldn't wear those. And she came home and she's like, Mom, I'm wearing wrong underwear. And we had a whole conversation. It's like, oh, but do you like them? And she's like, yes.
Right.
Well, like, well, then they're girl underwear too. You know, it's fine.
Yeah.
But she still brings that up, like
That's
at least
so
2 or 3 years later. Isn't that awful? Yeah.
Yes, it is. Especially since boy underwear is so much more durable than girl underwear. Like
Yes.
girl underwear is made with such shoddy materials. It's so thin.
Yeah.
It has like these, it like cuts up their butt and like has these like lacy edges that must be so uncomfortable. And boy underwear is like cotton and durable and like comfy. And like, why are we giving the girls the impression that their underwear should be uncomfortable when they're 2 years old?
Like, no wonder they want to keep wearing diapers.
That's
Like their
right.
options suck. But anyway, yeah, that's neither here nor there, except to say that like they soak it up like a little sponge, even at like 2, and they will remember the time that like their teacher told them that they were wearing boy undies.
Right.
But no, so let's talk about Mercy House a little bit and how it's been optioned as a TV series produced by Amy Schumer. And Amy Schumer is also, I feel like, really open about motherhood and all of the grisly bits, as you said. I love her posts having to do with like nursing and like the diapers you get at the hospital and everything. So
yeah, she's been such an advocate for like women's issues and just like human rights in general. Like she had hyperemesis gravidarum, so like that was like the constant throwing up for the entire time, where she was hospitalized multiple times. She made a documentary about it. And then following that, she had like endometriosis, which I had never even heard about because like people don't talk about just like common women's issues. And she had to have a hysterectomy, I believe, this year, but like brought so much awareness to it. And like so many, I think it's like 20% of women have endometriosis. That's like so many.
I had no idea. Yeah.
Me neither. I had to look up what it was. It's like, it just like, the more I learned, like the more I realized how much is just like withheld from public discourse. Like it's just not part of our universal language. So yes, like we're back to Mercy House. Yeah, that was super exciting. So like my writing journey was a really long one. It took me 10 years from when I started to like seriously pursue writing to the publication of my debut novel. And in the meantime, I had multiple agents and multiple manuscripts written and so many rejections and just like kept at it. And then finally I got this new agent in May 2018, who's my current agent. And like after 8 years at that point of just like bashing my head against the wall, trying to break through and like kind of accepting the fact that it might never happen for me, as it doesn't to so many people because it's just so hard. I got the agent, and then in June, we were suddenly getting calls from Hollywood, which was like so surreal. And I was just pregnant. So like it had been a point in my life where I like started writing this book where I was like, well, obviously like the writing thing isn't happening for me. So like maybe I'll, take some of those energies and put them towards mothering so that like I'm not doing everything in my life is not futile. Because I've like now I'm in my 30s and have spent so much time with just part-time work and writing, and I didn't pursue a career. So like, what am I going to do? So as I'm getting calls from Hollywood, I'm like starting to get morning sickness, and like I'm becoming a mother and a writer simultaneously, which was really interesting. Like, and then I spent that whole year like birthing this baby and birthing this book and like picking names and picking titles and decorating the nursery and getting cover images, and it was like kind of this interesting parallel. But anyway, we agreed to move forward with Amy Schumer before a publishing deal, which I think was really unusual. But I think it was like this kind of dawn of the streaming service where they're just hungry for material, that they're looking at manuscripts, which I didn't even realize that don't necessarily have anything attached. And my agent doesn't always do this like on principle of just submitting to film agents with manuscripts, but she thought that Mercy House had like a particular commercial appeal. So I was fortunate enough to have this Hollywood interest and the publishing and kind of like using that then to get momentum as we're like approaching the publication. So it's an ongoing process. and it's been a big education for me about like I thought that like writing a book and making a book was all so slow, and I'm like a person who like needs control and like are we moving forward and liking to like have the momentum and steering it, and with the television stuff, I've just like taken the back seat and like whatever happens will just be like a cherry on top. All I wanted was the book deal. I got that. And if this, progresses, and it has been so far, that's great. And I don't have to worry about the pace, because it is a very slow process, because there's just so many people involved that all have to like put their rubber stamp on every step of the way. And like, if anything disagrees, then they have to like go back to the beginning, and they all are juggling so many projects, because the likelihood of something ever going through is so small that they need to like throw just the numbers at the wall and see what sticks. So yeah, we're still moving forward. We have the first episode written. And I think we're just looking for casting, if I remember correctly, the process where we are right now. I'm like not particularly involved. Like I get like little updates here and there, which is really exciting. And like the whole thing is, and Amy's been like super supportive. She blurbed, "My body is a big fat temple." So that was like, and anytime I reach out to her, like she responds immediately. So that's like, she's just been very generous and forthcoming. And yeah, so I sent her the memoir because she had been so outspoken about issues with pregnancy and how we need to, support women better. So I was like, maybe you'd be interested in this. And she got back to me like within a week. So
wow.
Yeah, she's great.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, that's great to hear that somebody who seems wonderful and who seems to be doing great work is also like wonderful behind the scenes.
She is. And like, she always is like, sharing new artists and things that she supports and likes. And it just makes such a difference in people's lives. So like, I really admire that.
Oh, yeah. So tell us, for anyone who doesn't know what Mercy House is about, so that we can start following along the news for the show.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about Mercy House.
So it's about a nun who is investigated by the Vatican for breaking church doctrine and how she runs her women's shelter in Bed-Stuy. And it was kind of inspired by my working alongside nuns when my husband and I were at St. Joseph's College in Long Island. And I was just kind of awed by their devotion and their humanity, because I had always kind of figured that nuns were like these kind of boring, sterile robots, just because I had never interacted with them before, and they were just like so funny and compassionate and human. So I was just really inspired by them. And when I was there, it was during the Apostolic Visitation, which was the real investigation of nuns, where the Vatican made a point to visit every order to make sure, because they suspected them of being feminist and secular and not promoting church doctrine the way they wanted. So these women were kind of scared about what would be found, and like they are in tenuous positions because they're mostly older, and if they were excommunicated, they have no savings. So they were kind of like feeling that uncertainty, and I felt for them because the Vatican has made a point to protect people that aren't deserving of their protection, and then to kind of like put these women in a position where they feel like they're fighting for their lives seems like a big injustice.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I can see why your agent put that out to Hollywood. In addition to publishers, it sounds like it'll be an amazing series. I think that's
yeah, fantastic. I hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll have to come back when it launches so that
we can watch
it. But in the meantime, you also have a book that is just out, right? Eyes Turned Skyward.
So that's coming out this fall, but I had a novel come out this past year called The Happiest Girl in the World, and it was about a gymnast training for the Olympics and all of the sacrifices that are demanded of them, of their childhood and their personal life, and inspired by the Larry Nassar story.
Yep.
And then Eyes Turned Skyward is out this fall, and that's about a woman Air Force service pilot during World War II and her daughter 60 years later. So it's a dual timeline. And the contemporary timeline takes place when her daughter finds out that her mother was a pilot, that had been a secret that had been concealed her whole life. And so they have this chance to kind of reconcile because they have a prickly relationship, as her mother is nearing her death.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so it seems so. I'm so intrigued by the variety of stories that you tell, from the memoir to the nuns to, flight. So I'm pulling myself back from asking you where you get your ideas because that's the worst possible question. But it sounds like you're sparked um, by sort of interesting real life stories and people who are doing unexpected things or who are unexpected in or not quite who you thought they would be from the outside. Tell us a little bit more about like those characters and those stories.
Yeah, I think I'm struck by stories that are untold that I think should be more widely known,
Mhm.
and kind of exploring why those stories got concealed. And it usually has to do with some sort of social injustice, that probably frustrates me, and I like have all these questions about it, like how did this happen, what are the ramifications, and writing the books is my way of asking those questions and kind of exploring some possible answers. I don't always come up with an answer at the end, like with the gymnastics book. Like a lot of readers are like, so do you think, like, would you let your kid train gymnastics? Like, do you think that the Olympics are immoral? Like all of these really important questions. And I don't necessarily have the answer, like, because I'm just like kind of following this particular, family and these characters and the consequences in their lives. But it's a way for me to wrap my head around how these things happen in the world that have these tragic repercussions, and maybe how we can prevent them in the future.
Yeah, I think personally, I know everyone has different readings on books, but personally, I like when a question is not answered and that I'm left puzzling over the question myself. I'd rather be left with that uncertainty and the urge to explore my own opinions about something rather than to know at the end definitively what the author thinks or what the author wants me to think.
Yeah,
So
me
that's,
too.
yeah,
It makes the reader like more of an active participant in like the
yeah.
discussion, like instead of serving them the answers, like it gets them more engaged and asking questions themselves. And then it makes my job as like having to write the reader's guide at the end, like which was with all those book club questions, like it makes that one much easier.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So tell me a little bit about writing those later books with a small child. So, your first book, as you said, was starting to take root as you were pregnant and giving birth. So, what was the process like once you became a mother?
It's certainly been harder because like I had these like before I had I had part-time work, but I still have part-time work in addition to writing. So I had these like long languid hours where I could like kind of go in and out of writing and like take a break and return to it or take a walk to work out an idea. And now my time is much more constricted. And like if something pops up, like a doctor's appointment or like, getting the car's oil changed or something, like that just kills my like work hours. So like time has become much more precious. But I'm so fortunate because my husband is a professor and he's able to arrange his hours for the second half of the day so that he can cover childcare in the morning and I can cover childcare. And so we split it equally, which is, not a privilege that a lot of people have. So we save on daycare because otherwise like our finances would be a lot more tight because daycare is so expensive.
So expensive.
So yeah, I have like those hours in the morning, but I'm finding it even more difficult as my son becomes kind of more mobile and communicative, that he's like able to like open my door and come in and climb into my lap and say like, will you play with me? Or like, like tugging on your heartstrings, where you have like this choice then of like rejecting your son's love and like staying focused on the page. It's like it's very trying. Like you have to make these hard choices about like it's because it's not like a job where you have to answer to a boss, or you have to clock in. So it takes a lot more discipline, and then then it feels like more ruthless when you like could just step away, like no one's gonna be, after you. But then if you make that choice every day, you'll never get anything done. So it's like it's hard to find that balance.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I hear you. It's so much easier to say, well, I have a meeting and like my daughter can see all the people on the screen who I have to talk to, rather than to say, I need to work on this book and there's no one there. It's just
Right.
like, in this virtual space that we're in. But
Yeah.
yeah, so how do you deal with, or how do you move past the guilt to get your work done?
Ugh. I'm not like lately. I haven't really been very good at it. I mean, I probably get in like 3 hours a day, but like the days that my son, and we do have daycare twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, and those days are much better. But the days that my son's here, like yeah, it's so hard to just like it would be really nice if I had a workspace that was not in the house. But I just try to like do both, where like he's on my lap and I'm still thinking, or like I tell him, okay, let's have like a quick hug, and then you have to go. My husband's really good at trying to lure him out with like distractions, and but yeah, it's tough. Like every day is tough. And then I don't know, like I wonder how it will evolve, or like how my writing is affected by like these interruptions in focus, whereas like before I could just like completely zone in and be like in that world, whereas like now I'm kind of like flitting in and out. But in a way, like maybe motherhood enriches my work in a lot of ways too, because like I have all these other dimensions of experience and like perspective and empathy and frustration. And so like because my experiences are more multidimensional, like maybe that will compensate for the fact that my focus is lacking.
I'm sure I hear from many mothers of older children that is the case. I'm right there with you. I'm hoping that's true. Um, but as far as, so we've talked about sort of the content and the depth of writing, but have you seen the craft or the form of your writing change with these like, has the dipping in and out of the work changed like your narrative style or your form at all?
um I wonder, I've noticed that my chapters are shorter. I wonder, I hadn't considered if that's just because like my attention span is shorter, or if it's just because like we're serving to a new population too, that like whose general attention span is shorter.
Mhm.
So like in a way, like I don't know. I'm wondering if just like I'm evolving how my work, what my work style is out of necessity. Whereas like before I had like the luxury of choosing my ideal situation, and now it's just like out of survival. Because I've heard about other writers like Chandler Baker, I think it is, who's like a full-time lawyer, and she just like writes her novels during her lunch break, and like that boggles my mind how you could just like do that after like working all day, like in the like. So I like you fit in when you have to, because you have to write. Like that's, I mean, like I would have gotten through 8 years of rejection if I like had a choice, if I didn't have to write. So like that need still persists today. So I have faith in that need to like navigate through this space and through like the demands of motherhood to get me to my workspace again. But as far as style goes, I know my content is shifting directions. Like I've noticed that there's a much heavier emphasis on motherhood, and like the complicated relationships between parents and children, and how that evolves over time. And Eyes Turned Skyward, which is the novel that's forthcoming, is about like is mostly about a mother-daughter relationship. And another novel that I'm working on is about a mother and son, and this new project that I'm starting is about like postpartum psychosis. So like there's certainly a heavy interest right now in new motherhood, especially, and like how motherhood affects women, and the blessings and the consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. I also find that I'm similarly that motherhood has become a bit of an obsession in all of its iterations and from all perspectives. I'm also really interested, obviously, in other women who are writing about motherhood, and looking for those narratives, as you said, that just I feel like either weren't always there, or maybe I wasn't seeing them because I wasn't as interested in them.
I think they're coming out like fresh. Like I think that there used to be this like demand for a certain type of mother in a story, and like even like my first 8 years of struggling, like I always got the answer like your characters are unlikable, and it was usually because they were flawed. Like just like they weren't like the female character that everyone was looking for, which is this like superhuman heroine. And lately, like even on television shows, and I love TV, like all of the women who won awards this year were representing these like extremely nuanced and complicated women, and not perfect mothers, like Mayor of Easttown, like mothers who make mistakes, and mothers who are petty, and mothers who are cruel, like The Crown, for instance, like she's like not a nurturing mother. So like yeah, there's all different types of women now are emerging in story, and I think it's such a gift because now like there's just more ways for us to identify with characters and like to feel kind of free to talk about who we are honestly.
Oh yeah, and it's so inspiring to see women like yourself, like all of the guests on the show, talking about writing flawed, quote unquote, unlikable characters, and talking about those flawed, unlikable parts of ourselves, or parts of ourselves that could be perceived as unlikable, like telling your child, I need to focus on my work right now. That's we're told by all of the messaging in our society that that's not something you should do as a mother, right? That if you should give your whole self to your child. So it's encouraging and inspiring to see so many women changing that narrative, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's just so much more interesting too,
It is,
rather
yeah.
than like having all of these female characters be like these side, like the nagging wife, or
Mhm.
like the despairing, or like the weak wife, like all these like side characters who are just like on the periphery. But like now we're like really examining their their inner turmoil and like who they really are. And yeah, it's been fascinating, and like it just makes TV and story just so much richer and more honest.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm thinking as you say that of like the 90s, where all the wives and mothers were these sort of like, they were the straight man, so to speak, to their husbands, who got to be these flawed, like dopey guys, like
Yes. Oh
home
my gosh.
improvement or whatever.
Oh, like how many sitcoms did we watch that was the same story?
Yeah.
Yeah, like Everyone Loves Raymond and King of Queens, and like, I
Mhm.
mean, and I liked those shows, but like it was the same show, and it was like
Mhm.
women just had to be like the wet blanket to their. I mean, like, and I wouldn't want to have like as a man to have like myself represented over and over again in these guys that like are incompetent and just like irresponsible and making life miserable for their wives.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad the narrative is shifting.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's see. We have just a few minutes left, and I have so many things I still want to talk to you about. So you will just have to come back.
Okay.
But tell us a little bit. So you said you have 3 projects. It sounds like 3 projects that you're working on. You have the forthcoming novel, and then there were 2 others.
So I have a book that's on submission with my editor right now. So I don't know if she'll pick it up, but it's a project that I've been working on for a number of years, and it's about the opioid crisis, and like a blue collar mother, single mother whose son gets caught up, like so many people have, in opioid addiction through painkillers, through like the pharmaceutical companies' big push. And so we'll see where that goes. I feel very passionate about it. And then I'm just like in the very beginning stages of starting a new novel, which is about postpartum mood disorders, because I feel like after going through postpartum depression, or what I think was postpartum depression, I don't even know, because it's so ambiguous, and like it's so hard to diagnose, and people you don't even see your doctor until you're like 6 weeks into it. So like it's anyway. So I've been kind of fascinated with like that postpartum psychology, and at what point to be treated and like to take things seriously, and what is normal and what isn't normal, what is scary and what isn't scary. And in my research, like before I got pregnant, I was reading Ordinary Insanity, which is about postpartum anxiety. And there was a case of a mother who like knew she had postpartum depression and told her doctor that she had a thought about hurting her kid, but didn't think it was like, it wasn't going to act on it. It was just like an intrusive thought. And the doctor involuntarily admitted her into a psychiatric hospital where she could not get out for a week. And like how traumatic that was for her and her family, and like what might have been a better way to address that situation. So I'm kind of exploring that, injustice, I guess, or like, this uncommon story through, these characters of my own creation.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think you'll definitely have to come back and talk about all of these next books. But this has been such a pleasure. And thank you so much for joining us. Alena, this has just been so much fun.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I love your podcast and your whole brand. And like, I love the monstrosity aspect. Like, that's so unexpected, but like feels so true too sometimes. Oh, yeah. And like, I love all your merchandise and like those imagery, your imagery. It's just... Oh. It's bold and and awesome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and for anyone listening who hasn't seen the actual show, this is a good time to join us and see all of the things that Alena is mentioning, and my new backdrop for at least this episode. We'll see if it stays up, of my male mermaids back there. I feel like that's in keeping with the monstrousness in the brand. Yeah. So so thank you, Alena, and please come back again.
Oh yeah, can't wait. Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. It's been a great hour with you. As always, please, if you enjoyed the episode, consider becoming a patron or patroness of Writer Mother Monster. You can find the link on writermothermonster.com. And there are many ways to support the show if you enjoy it. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Please join us live for the show, comment, ask questions, or you can find us after the fact anywhere you get your podcasts or as a video on YouTube. Thank you all, and good night.